A hidden room, a black coffin, a giant skeleton? The Titanic's real story is far stranger than we ever imagined. Deep inside the Titanic, past crumpled stairwells and decaying corridors, there's a section that doesn't show up on any map. It's not part of any official deck plans, and for years no one even thought to look for it. But recently, new footage taken by remote-operated submersibles revealed a space that had been sealed off since 1912, a narrow chamber tucked behind a warped bulkhead, hidden by collapsed steel and layers of rust. What's most unsettling is how preserved it looks. While most of the ship has been shredded by time and pressure, this small room stands eerily intact. The walls aren't lined with luxury panels or passenger decor like you'd expect. Instead, they're bare and metallic, like a storage unit or vault. Two portholes are still in place, one of them wrenched open, as if someone had left in a hurry, or tried to get in. The floor is coated with a fine layer of undisturbed silt, and nothing inside carries a name, a label, or even a hint of its purpose. Theories started flying almost immediately. Some believe it was a makeshift panic room, built in secret for high-ranking passengers. Others think it could have been a cargo holding area, storing something that didn't belong on a civilian voyage. A few even say it might have been used for early experiments in underwater navigation, the kind of stuff you'd expect to see in classified files, not buried in an ocean liner. Whatever this room was meant for, it wasn't meant to be found. And yet, now that it's out in the open, it raises more questions than answers. Why did it need to be hidden? Who had access to it? And what else, buried under 100 years of silence, is still waiting to be seen? Not far from the hidden room, another discovery pulled the team deeper into the ship's secrets. Wedged inside a collapsed hallway behind layers of debris and silt was a heavy, rust-covered safe. Unlike many items looted or salvaged years ago, this one had been missed, sealed so tightly that even the crushing pressure of 2.5 miles of ocean hadn't cracked it open. When the safe was brought to the surface and carefully pried apart, expectations were low. Most artifacts from Titanic are ruined by now, nothing more than fragile scraps. But inside this safe, they found something completely unexpected, a folded, water-stained map drawn by hand, and still partly readable. Rumors have it didn't show ordinary ocean routes or passenger records. Instead, it marked a part of the South Atlantic far from Titanic's sinking spot. A place with no shipping lanes, no settlements, just coordinates marked by cryptic symbols and a single word scrawled across the top: repeater. Some experts think it could have been part of a navigational experiment. Others aren't so sure. There's speculation the map could point to a secret mission the Titanic was never meant to complete. A hidden rendezvous, a transfer, something that now lies buried with the ship's twisted steel. Whatever the truth, this safe's contents only add to the feeling that the Titanic wasn't just a cruise gone wrong. It was carrying secrets meant to stay submerged forever. Among the wreckage twisted by time, explorers spotted something that made the whole operation go silent. Near a collapsed section of the boiler room, half buried in sediment, was a human skull, teeth still intact, staring up from the darkness. Around it, broken planks and rusted pipes lay scattered, as if frozen in the moment the ship broke apart. At first, it seemed like another tragic reminder of the hundreds who never made it to the lifeboats. But as researchers looked closer, strange details started to surface. The condition of the remains didn't match the others found at Titanic's resting place. This skeleton seemed oddly positioned, almost trapped beneath heavy debris, far from where most passengers would have been during the sinking. Even more puzzling, some experts believe the body showed signs of being there long before April 1912. That theory, if proven true, could flip the entire Titanic story upside down. Was it a worker lost during the ship's frantic construction? A stowaway hiding in the wrong place at the wrong time? Or something even more unsettling? Someone locked inside, never meant to be found? Nothing in the official shipyard records mentions a missing worker. No survivor accounts tell of anyone getting trapped like this. It's almost like this skeleton doesn't belong to the voyage we know, but to a secret chapter buried deep within Titanic's steel bones. Down there, where light barely reaches and everything feels frozen in time, one can't help but wonder, what else lies beneath the ship's broken decks, hidden away from the world for over a century? During a recent dive to re-examine Titanic's wreck, cameras caught something no one had ever noticed before. Lining the bow, dozens of human-like figures stood frozen, their shapes eerily lifelike under layers of sand and time. At first glance, it looked like a mass of lost souls still clinging to the ship. Experts quickly stepped in. This wasn't a natural formation. It appeared to be a newly discovered underwater art installation, meant to honor those who were lost. But why here? And why now? The location had remained undisturbed for over a century. Some wonder if the statues were placed without official record, creating a haunting memorial the ocean decided to keep secret. Not long ago, while surveying scattered debris around the Titanic, a team came across something small, fragile, and completely unexpected. An old glass bottle, wedged between pieces of broken wood. Inside, protected by time and cold, was a rolled scrap of paper. Experts handled it carefully, afraid it might crumble with the slightest touch. What they found stunned everyone. The letter inside was dated April 16, 1912, a full day after the Titanic was supposed to have sunk. The handwriting was shaky, almost rushed, and the short message hinted at survival, at something left unfinished. No known passenger matched the name scribbled at the bottom. No records mentioned anything like it. Could it have been a desperate attempt to reach the surface? A hoax from a different shipwreck? Or something stranger? A voice that somehow slipped through time? No one can say for sure. But even today, the bottle's message remains one of the most unsettling discoveries ever made near the wreck. Hidden deep within Titanic's shattered cargo hold, divers recently uncovered something that wasn't listed on any shipping manifest. It was a long, black object, shaped almost like a coffin, wedged between twisted beams and collapsed crates. At first, many assumed it was another piece of broken furniture, but as light swept over it, it became clear this object wasn't made of wood. It was carved from a dark stone-like material, smooth and cold even after more than a century under the sea. No labels, no markings, nothing to identify where it came from or who it belonged to. When experts managed to remotely open the strange container, they found it empty, completely dry inside despite the crushing depths outside. That alone sent a chill through the team. In an environment where even steel crumbles, how could this thing remain untouched? Some believe it could have been part of a private shipment, a personal item loaded without official documentation. Others point to older legends, hinting at forbidden relics being transported across oceans. A few even wonder if it was connected to something far more secretive, an artifact meant never to see the light of day again. Why was it on board a ship supposedly focused on luxury travel? Why was it hidden so deep, and who ordered it to be carried in silence, risking everything? The discovery of the black coffin raises questions that no historical record can answer, and leaves behind a mystery that only grows darker the longer it remains unexplained. Titanic's wreck has always been a place where nature slowly reclaims history, but lately, scientists have noticed something they can't easily explain. Covering parts of the rusting hull, especially along deep cracks and collapsed walls, is a strange new type of marine growth. It's not barnacles, it's not ordinary rusticles, those icicle-like rust formations everyone knows. This growth is different, darker, almost black in some spots, glowing faintly under deep sea lights in others. Samples were taken with extreme caution. When studied, the organism showed traits no one expected. It appeared to feed directly on the iron, breaking it down far faster than normal bacteria could. Some sections of the ship that were stable for decades are now crumbling at an alarming rate, as if something is actively consuming them from the inside out. What's even stranger is how this growth seems to form deliberate patterns, swirling shapes and streaks almost like writing. Some researchers say it's just coincidence, tricks of the light in the deep sea. Others aren't so sure. There's quiet talk about whether Titanic has become home to something entirely new, something born out of darkness, pressure, and time. If this organism keeps spreading, the Titanic could vanish far sooner than anyone expected. Maybe, some say, that's exactly what was meant to happen all along. In a recent dive that stunned even seasoned explorers, cameras captured something no one ever expected to find near Titanic's wreck. A massive skeleton, half buried in the ocean floor, between the torn halves of the ship. At first, it looked like twisted metal, but as lights moved across it, the shape became unmistakable. A long spine, rib bones stretching wide, and a skull far larger than any known sea creature today. Scientists rushed to explain it away. Some suggested it might be remains of a whale dragged there by currents. But the structure didn't match any known species. Too symmetrical, too intact. Quietly, a few experts began asking harder questions. Was this evidence of a creature lost to time, one that witnessed Titanic's final hours from the deep? The ocean still hides much more than we understand. And now, a century later, Titanic's grave may be revealing one of its greatest secrets yet. The deeper explorers dig into Titanic's resting place, the stranger the story becomes. Between hidden rooms, unregistered cargo, and now a giant skeleton lying silently beneath the broken decks, it feels like the wreck is whispering something no one expected to hear. What if the disaster wasn't just an accident? What if something far older and far more dangerous played a role in what happened that night? One of the wildest theories gaining quiet momentum suggests that Titanic wasn't brought down by an iceberg alone, but by an encounter with a giant sea creature. Survivors did report strange sounds, impacts, and vibrations just before the sinking, details often brushed aside in official reports. Some point to the unexplained damage patterns found on the ship's hull, odd tears and punctures that don't line up perfectly with an iceberg strike. Could a massive creature hidden in the cold Atlantic depths have struck the ship and disappeared into the darkness? It's a theory usually reserved for old sailor tales and horror movies, but when looking at that huge skeleton lying nearby, suddenly, the idea doesn't seem quite as impossible as it once did. The sea has always hidden giants. Maybe the Titanic crossed paths with one of them. Even before Titanic set sail, strange things were being whispered behind the scenes. Workers at the Harland and Wolff shipyard reportedly heard footsteps in empty corridors during construction. Some said tools would vanish and reappear overnight. Others mentioned unexplained cold spots and doors that slammed by themselves in locked rooms. None of this made it into the newspapers, of course. The world only saw the shining marvel of engineering, not the shadows that trailed behind it. And once the ship left port, the unease didn't stop. There were passengers who reportedly asked to disembark after claiming they had vivid nightmares of drowning. Crew members are said to have refused to enter certain storage areas alone. One steward allegedly quit just hours before departure after hearing what he described as voices from the floor. Over the years, some investigators have pointed to an eerie pattern. The Titanic carried not only people but perhaps a certain energy. Whether it was tied to the immense loss of life or something far older that was unknowingly brought aboard, no one can say. But paranormal researchers claim that modern audio scans and sonar sweeps have captured unexplained echoes, rhythmic tapping and faint cries, coming from areas of the wreck where no equipment should be registering anything at all. It's easy to dismiss it all as deep-sea interference, but the deeper you look into the Titanic's history, the harder it gets to ignore one disturbing possibility. The ship was never really silent, not then, and maybe not even now. In the early 1900s, the shipping industry was more than just competition. It was a battlefield. White Star Line, the company behind Titanic, was locked in a fierce race against Cunard Line, famous for ships like the Lusitania. The prize was simple total domination over transatlantic travel. Prestige, power, and fortunes were on the line. Some believe Titanic's downfall wasn't just an accident or bad luck, but part of a hidden war between these industrial giants. Rumors have floated for years that rival businessmen sabotaged each other's ships, that corners were cut, that key decisions were made not for safety, but for speed and showmanship. Titanic was rushed through her final phases of construction, aiming to steal headlines from Cunard's latest marvels. Could minor faults have been deliberately overlooked? Could warnings about icebergs have been ignored under pressure to make headlines? Some even suggest the iceberg wasn't the true enemy, but that the ship was weakened long before it ever set sail, the result of industrial espionage and silent sabotage. In a world where fortunes depended on being the fastest and the grandest, the Titanic might have become an unknowing casualty in a battle that most passengers never even knew existed. Of all the strange theories about Titanic, this one refuses to die. That the ship resting at the bottom of the Atlantic isn't Titanic at all, but her nearly identical sister ship, Olympic. The Olympic was launched a year earlier and quickly ran into trouble. After a serious collision with a Royal Navy ship, she was heavily damaged and racked up huge repair costs. Some believe White Star Line, facing bankruptcy, came up with a shocking solution. Swap Olympic for Titanic. The brand new Titanic would quietly take Olympic's place, while the battered Olympic would be repainted, renamed, and sent on a doomed voyage to collect a massive insurance payout. Supporters of this theory point to small differences spotted in photos, like slight variations in porthole layouts and deck details. They claim the swap explains the strange behavior of certain ship officers who may have known something wasn't right from the beginning. There's no official proof, no secret confessions, yet the idea that the Titanic we mourn might not even be the real Titanic adds a chilling new layer to the tragedy, and reminds us how little we may actually know about what really happened that night. Most people link the Bermuda Triangle with ghost ships and vanishing planes, not the Titanic. After all, Titanic sank far north of that infamous stretch of ocean. Still, some researchers have pointed to strange parallels: unexplained radio failures, shifting coordinates, and survivors who described the sea that night as unnaturally calm before disaster struck. A growing theory suggests that Titanic may have crossed into a lesser-known edge of the Bermuda Triangle's influence, a drifting anomaly reaching out beyond the usual map lines. Some experts argue that magnetic disturbances, strange fogs, and sudden weather changes associated with the Bermuda Triangle could extend much farther than we think, affecting ships without warning. Could Titanic have sailed through one of these invisible zones, scrambling its navigation and sending it straight into deadly danger? It's an idea that sounds like science fiction, but the ocean's mysteries rarely fit neat explanations. And the thought that unseen forces played a hand in history's most famous sinking makes the story even harder to forget. At the dawn of the 20th century, weather control wasn't just a dream, it was an obsession. Scientists were already experimenting with ways to alter storms, shift ocean currents, and even control rainfall. Most of it stayed hidden from public view, dismissed as too experimental, too risky. Some now believe that secret projects may have accidentally pushed Titanic into harm's way. One theory suggests that experimental attempts to influence the Atlantic's weather might have triggered unexpected iceberg drifts, sending frozen giants farther south than ever recorded before. Other ideas hint at subtle changes in ocean currents, currents that Titanic's experienced crew could never have anticipated. There's no direct evidence, just scattered mentions in forgotten naval reports and weather station logs. Still, the timeline fits a chilling possibility that Titanic's collision wasn't just a freak accident, but the unintended fallout from early experiments in playing with nature's forces. If true, it would mean the ship was caught not by fate, but by human ambition gone a step too far. For over 100 years, the iceberg has been the villain in Titanic's story, but some researchers have started to ask a different question: what if it wasn't an iceberg at all? According to a fringe but growing theory, the object Titanic struck wasn't frozen water but something far stranger, a submerged craft, hidden beneath the surface. Some survivors reported seeing strange lights near the horizon just before the collision, flashes that didn't match distress signals or ship lights. Others described an impact that felt different from striking ice, like a glancing blow against something solid but smooth. Supporters of the theory believe Titanic may have collided with an unidentified submerged object, a USO, lurking deep beneath the Atlantic waves. Maybe it was damaged centuries ago, lying dormant under the sea, cloaked in ice and currents. Or maybe it was moving, unseen in the darkness, when Titanic crossed its path at exactly the wrong moment. There's no hard proof, only scattered witness accounts and the chilling realization that in the deep oceans, there are things we still barely understand. The idea of Titanic striking not a mountain of ice but a visitor from beyond our knowledge adds a whole new layer of mystery to the most famous sinking in history. Not every theory about Titanic's fate points to accidents or natural forces. Some suggest the sinking was no accident at all, but a carefully planned move by some of the most powerful men of the early 20th century. At the time Titanic set sail, major battles were raging over money, banks, and the future of world economies. Three of the most influential figures opposed to the creation of the U.S. Federal Reserve, John Jacob Astor IV, Benjamin Guggenheim, and Isidor Straus, were all aboard the ship. None of them survived. In the years that followed, the Federal Reserve was established, changing the financial world forever. The theory suggests that Titanic's sinking conveniently removed several powerful opponents at once. Some point to odd last-minute decisions. J.P. Morgan, who funded Titanic's construction and owned White Star Line, canceled his trip just before departure, citing illness, only to be seen later relaxing in France. Why would the man behind the ship's success miss its maiden voyage? Other strange details pile up. Warnings about icebergs ignored, lifeboats insufficient, and a lack of urgent response from nearby ships. It paints a picture not of simple misfortune, but of a chain of decisions designed to leave Titanic vulnerable at the worst possible moment. Of course, there's no official proof, no smoking gun. But the deeper you dig into who stood to benefit, the harder it becomes to dismiss the idea that Titanic's story is far more tangled and darker than history books have ever been willing to admit. Of all the strange theories surrounding Titanic, one stands out not because it's the most outrageous, but because it feels strangely possible in the way only the best mysteries do. Some believe Titanic's fate wasn't left to chance, that time travelers knew what was going to happen, and tried to stop it. The whispers start with survivor accounts. A few passengers mention seeing oddly dressed individuals aboard, men who didn't quite fit the time, who wore unusual coats or used strange phrases. Others reported seeing strange flashes of light on the horizon the night of the sinking, bursts that didn't match flares or known ship signals. Even more unsettling, several survivors swore that the ship seemed to receive phantom warnings of ice ahead, more than what the official record shows, almost as if someone was desperately trying to change its course. Some historians dismiss these reports as stress-induced memories. Others quietly admit the pattern is unusual. In a modern world fascinated by shows like Doctor Who and movies like Interstellar, the idea that someone could have traveled back to prevent the disaster doesn't seem as impossible as it once did. Maybe they tried. Maybe they sent warnings. Maybe they even boarded the ship themselves, thinking they could rewrite one of history's greatest tragedies. Yet, the timeline held firm. Despite every signal, every warning, Titanic met her end in the cold Atlantic waters. And if someone really did try to change history, all they managed to leave behind were ghost stories. Flickers of light, scrambled radio calls, and memories of faces no one could explain. In the end, the Titanic's sinking remains a defining mystery. A moment so large it almost feels like time itself bent around it. Whether the forces behind it were human, natural, or something far stranger, one thing is certain. The deeper we look, the less simple the story becomes. And maybe that's why Titanic's legend will never fade, because somewhere, hidden in rusted steel and forgotten memories, the real truth is still waiting. Deep in the darkness of the Atlantic, among the wreckage of one of history's greatest maritime tragedies, researchers recently stumbled upon something astonishing: a perfectly preserved bronze statuette, eerily reminiscent of the famous Diana of Versailles. This artifact, a miniature sculpture of the Roman goddess of the hunt, lay buried beneath layers of sediment, shielded from corrosive saltwater by a strange pocket of debris. Experts believe this statuette was a luxury item, possibly a gift or a prized possession of a wealthy passenger. What makes it truly remarkable is its condition. Unlike other metallic artifacts that corroded over time, this piece remains almost untouched, its fine details still crisp. Some speculate that the unique mix of cold temperatures, pressure, and a chemical reaction from the ship's metal created an environment that slowed deterioration. But here's where it gets even stranger. The statuette wasn't listed on any known cargo manifest or passenger inventory. It simply appeared, as if waiting to be discovered. Could it have been smuggled on board? Was it lost before the disaster and somehow ended up among the wreckage? No one knows for sure. The eerie preservation of the artifact has led some to theorize that there may be other hidden pockets in the Titanic, preserving lost relics of the past in ways we never imagined. Just when researchers thought they had cataloged every type of personal artifact from the Titanic, they came across something that left them stunned: an ancient Megalodon tooth, but not just any tooth. This massive fossil, estimated to be millions of years old, had been carefully set into a gold frame and fashioned into a necklace. The idea that such a relic was on board raises more questions than answers. Who owned it? Was it a rare collector's item? Or did it hold some deeper meaning, perhaps a belief in its power or a connection to the mysterious deep? More intriguing is how the necklace survived it all. Unlike gold, which resists corrosion, fossilized teeth from long-extinct predators are porous and fragile. Yet this one remained intact, protected by the very shipwreck that doomed its owner. Even stranger, no records mention a passenger bringing such an object aboard, leading some to wonder if it was an unlisted treasure, a smuggled artifact, or even a hidden gift. The image of someone on the Titanic, proudly wearing a relic from a prehistoric monster of the sea, is both eerie and fascinating. And speaking of objects frozen in time, another discovery has left scientists with an unsettling reminder of the exact moment the great ship met its fate. A rust-covered pocket watch, its delicate hands forever frozen at 2:18 a.m., was found nestled beneath a twisted section of the Titanic's hull. Unlike many other timepieces recovered over the years, this one was found at a spot that matches precisely with survivor testimonies of when the ship made its final descent beneath the waves. Its placement suggests it may have belonged to a passenger who held onto it until the very end, a heartbreaking reminder of those last chaotic moments. The watch's glass face was shattered, likely from impact, yet the mechanism inside remained visible, stopped at the exact minute history recorded as the ship's final breath. This discovery isn't just another artifact, it's a timestamp of a tragedy, a piece of history encased in rust and salt. What's even more chilling is the condition of the watch's chain. Unlike most metals which have corroded over the decades, the links remain surprisingly well preserved, as if shielding their lost owner's last moments from time itself. And time, as it turns out, has preserved yet another remarkable relic. A bronze cherub that once illuminated the heart of Titanic's grandeur. Among the most breathtaking finds in the recent Titanic expedition was a bronze cherub, one of the ornate statues that once lined the ship's iconic grand staircase. For decades, this piece of Titanic's elegance was thought to have been lost forever. Yet there it was, resting beneath layers of debris, its once polished surface now encrusted with deep-sea growth. The cherub, likely dislodged during the ship's violent descent, is one of the few decorative artifacts from the grand staircase ever recovered. What makes it so significant isn't just its rarity, but what it represents, the opulence of Titanic's design, now frozen in time at the bottom of the Atlantic. Unlike wooden artifacts that rotted away long ago, the bronze statue, though tarnished, still holds its form. Even stranger, experts noted that the cherub's right hand, once outstretched to hold a glowing lamp, was missing. Some speculate it may still lie somewhere nearby, waiting to be uncovered. But while the cherub was a symbol of Titanic's splendor, another newly explored section of the wreck reveals a more personal, almost haunting glimpse into the life of the ship's captain. In a hidden corner of the wreck, buried beneath collapsed walls and twisted metal, researchers uncovered an astonishingly well-preserved relic, Captain Edward Smith's private bathtub. The discovery was both eerie and intimate, offering a rare, unfiltered look into the personal space of the man who commanded the Titanic. The tub, once part of the captain's lavish quarters, had somehow remained recognizable despite more than a century underwater. The porcelain was cracked and heavily rusted, but its shape was intact. What fascinated experts the most was the way the sea had claimed it. Strange, ghostly formations of rusticles now drape over the edges like frozen waterfalls, making it look almost otherworldly. Standing before this relic, it's impossible not to imagine the moments before the disaster, when Smith may have stood in that very room, contemplating his final voyage. And in an ironic twist, deep-sea technology, the very thing that helped locate his bathtub, also led to an unexpected find. One belonging not to Titanic's original voyage, but to those who first tried to uncover its secrets. As cameras scanned the ocean floor for lost artifacts, something unexpected came into view. An old mechanical robotic arm, detached and half buried in the sediment. Unlike the ship's remains, this piece of equipment wasn't from 1912, but rather from one of the earliest expeditions to explore Titanic's wreck. The robotic arm was part of a submersible used in the 1980s and 90s, back when technology was first allowing humans to see Titanic's ruins up close. It was likely lost during an attempt to retrieve artifacts or navigate the wreck's tight corridors. What makes this find so unusual is how time has treated it. Unlike Titanic's rust-covered relics, the arm remains relatively intact, its joints and metal plating still visible under the layers of marine growth. In a way, it's a relic of two eras, the tragedy of 1912 and the decades-long quest to uncover its secrets. As modern explorers continue to search, they not only uncover Titanic's past, but also remnants of their own history, left behind in the deep. But this discovery raises another question. If forgotten expedition equipment can be found decades later, what else might still be hidden beneath Titanic's ruins? Among the countless scattered remnants of the Titanic, one discovery stood out for its eerie sense of presence: a perfectly preserved porthole window, still intact, its thick glass remarkably almost unbroken after more than a century beneath the crushing pressure of the Atlantic depths. This find isn't just another piece of wreckage, it's a silent witness to the tragedy, a literal window into the past. What makes this discovery so remarkable is how rare it is. Most portholes that have been found before were either shattered or corroded beyond recognition. This one, however, remained sealed, its brass fittings encrusted with deep-sea deposits but otherwise well preserved. Some speculate that it may have belonged to a first-class cabin, possibly one with a direct view of the night sky as the ship sank. There's something deeply unsettling about looking through that same glass today, knowing that someone, in their final moments, may have done the same, gazing out at the vast ocean, watching the cold, dark waters rise. What remains of the Titanic today is a haunting shell of what was once the grandest ship ever built. Over a century beneath the crushing pressure of the Atlantic, the wreck has been claimed by time, its once pristine steel structure now crumbling into the abyss. The bow, once instantly recognizable, is collapsing inward, while the stern, which broke apart during the sinking, has become an unrecognizable tangle of twisted metal. The grand staircase, where first-class passengers once strolled in elegance, has long since vanished, leaving behind only traces of its former glory. Recent deep-sea scans and 3D mapping have revealed just how much the Titanic has deteriorated in the past few decades. Rusticles, strange icicle-like formations created by deep-sea bacteria, are eating away at the ship's remains, converting its iron into fine, rust-colored dust. Some experts estimate that entire sections of the wreck could vanish within the next few decades, collapsing into the seafloor under their own weight. The latest expeditions have even captured footage of areas where entire walls have caved in, structures have disappeared, and once solid decks have become fragile, paper-thin layers of rust. What's most shocking is that this process is accelerating. While the Titanic sat relatively stable for much of the 20th century, recent studies suggest that its decay has sped up dramatically in the past 2 decades. Some scientists now predict that within 20 to 30 years, much of the wreck will be unrecognizable, reduced to little more than scattered debris. The Titanic is not just sinking, it is dissolving, erasing itself from history with every passing year. And yet, despite this decay, the wreck remains one of the most mesmerizing sights in the deep ocean. Its presence is a powerful reminder of a moment frozen in time, a ship that set sail in triumph but now rests in silence, slowly disappearing into the dark. The Titanic is vanishing, but its story will never fade. The Titanic is slowly disappearing, but its legacy is stronger than ever. Beyond the wreckage, the ship's history is filled with fascinating facts, engineering feats, overlooked details, and incredible luxuries. Now, let's explore the Titanic beyond the ocean floor. Before it became the most famous shipwreck in history, the Titanic was an engineering triumph. Built in Belfast, Ireland by the Harland and Wolff shipyard, it was one of the largest moving objects ever created, stretching 882 feet in length and weighing over 46,000 tons. At the time, its sheer scale was astonishing, longer than the tallest buildings of its era and nearly the length of 3 football fields. Engineers used over 3 million rivets to hold its steel plates together, and the ship was powered by massive steam engines capable of generating 46,000 horsepower. But what truly set the Titanic apart wasn't just its size. It was designed with cutting-edge technology, including a double-bottomed hull and 16 watertight compartments, meant to keep it afloat even if multiple sections were breached. Ironically, this same design led to its downfall. When the iceberg tore open 5 compartments, the ship's own weight dragged it down. Still, for its time, the Titanic was a floating masterpiece, a ship built for comfort as much as capability, and that comfort extended to luxuries rarely seen at sea, including something that few passengers had ever experienced before: a swimming pool on a moving vessel. At a time when most ships prioritized practicality over leisure, the Titanic dared to offer luxuries that were unheard of, including an onboard swimming pool. Located on the ship's F deck, the pool was exclusive to first-class passengers and filled with seawater, heated to a comfortable temperature. For many, this was an entirely new experience. Indoor swimming pools were still a rarity on land, let alone on a ship in the middle of the Atlantic. What made the Titanic's pool so unique wasn't just its existence, but how advanced it was for the time. It had tiled walls, steps leading into the water, and even changing rooms. The entrance fee? Just a shilling, roughly the price of a loaf of bread at the time. Today, nearly every cruise ship features a pool, but back then, this was a privilege only the wealthiest could enjoy. And while the pool was a sign of luxury, it wasn't the only place on board where passengers could focus on their health. Just a deck above, the Titanic featured another rarity, its own fully equipped gym. In an era when most people had never even seen a gym, the Titanic had one of the most advanced fitness centers of its time. Located on the boat deck, the gymnasium offered state-of-the-art exercise equipment, including stationary bikes, rowing machines, and even an early version of an electric treadmill. For passengers who wanted to stay active, this was a groundbreaking feature. Exercise was just beginning to gain popularity, and the idea of working out for leisure rather than necessity was still new. The gym wasn't just for fitness, it was a social space, often filled with first-class passengers dressed in elegant athletic wear, chatting as they cycled or lifted weights. There was even a mechanical camel and horse machine, designed to simulate horseback riding for those who missed their equestrian workouts. And if that wasn't enough, passengers could also take advantage of another wellness feature rarely seen on ships, the Titanic's luxurious Turkish baths. The Titanic didn't just provide a gym for exercise, it also offered a lavish way to relax afterward. The ship featured an elaborate Turkish bath complex, something that even many luxury hotels of the time didn't have. This exclusive space, located on F-deck, was designed in a Moorish style, complete with intricate tiling, marble benches, and multiple heated rooms. For first-class passengers, this was the pinnacle of relaxation. They could move from a steam-filled hot room to a warm room before cooling off in the plunge pool. It was a feature inspired by the grand bathhouses of the Ottoman Empire, offering a level of indulgence unheard of on most ships. Even the Titanic's wealthiest guests were impressed. After all, few people had access to such amenities, even on land. These luxuries showcased just how ahead of its time the Titanic was. It wasn't just a ship, it was a floating palace, designed to rival the finest hotels of the world. But while the first-class passengers enjoyed its many comforts, the Titanic was also home to an entirely different world, one that had its own fascinating details hidden below deck. The Titanic wasn't just a passenger liner, it was also an official mail carrier for the British Royal Mail, giving it the title RMS Titanic or Royal Mail Ship. This designation meant that the ship carried thousands of letters and parcels, processed by a dedicated team of 5 postal clerks, including both American and British staff. They worked in a specially designed mailroom on the ship's G-deck, sorting letters by hand as Titanic made its way across the Atlantic. The scale of the operation was impressive. Titanic transported over 3,400 sacks of mail, amounting to 7 million pieces of correspondence. The clerks worked tirelessly, often for long hours in a windowless, cramped space, ensuring that letters reached their destinations efficiently. Tragically, as the ship sank, the postal workers attempted to save as much mail as possible, seen dragging heavy mail bags toward the upper decks in a futile effort. None of them survived, and their sacrifice remains one of the lesser-known but incredible stories of dedication aboard the Titanic. But letters weren't the only form of media on the ship. Titanic even had its own daily newspaper, a unique feature that set it apart from most other ocean liners of the time. In an era long before Wi-Fi and television, Titanic passengers had an unusual luxury: access to daily news, printed right on the ship. The Atlantic Daily Bulletin was the Titanic's very own onboard newspaper, published each day with the latest headlines, stock market updates, horse racing results, and even first-class menu highlights. The newspaper was printed in the ship's Marconi room, where wireless operators received news updates via telegraph. These snippets of information were then compiled into the bulletin and displayed throughout the ship, giving passengers a small but important connection to the outside world. It was an impressive innovation for the time, considering that real-time news updates were unheard of during long ocean voyages. The fact that Titanic passengers could read about the stock market's performance while sailing in the middle of the Atlantic was a luxury very few people had experienced before. While first-class travelers skimmed the newspaper over morning coffee, The ship's kitchens were busy preparing gourmet meals for its wealthiest passengers. And the last meal ever served on the Titanic has since become a haunting symbol of the extravagance that ended so tragically. The final dinner served to first-class passengers on the Titanic is a fascinating look at the sheer opulence of the ship. Hours before disaster struck, the ship's wealthiest guests sat down to a 10-course meal, an elaborate feast that included oysters, poached salmon, filet mignon, roast duck, and cold asparagus vinaigrette. The meal was topped off with desserts like peach compote, chocolate eclairs, and a selection of fine cheeses. What makes this meal so striking is the contrast. It was a scene of elegance, laughter, and indulgence, just moments before tragedy unfolded. Passengers enjoyed fine wines, listened to the orchestra play, and had no idea that within hours, the very world they knew would be turned upside down. The menu itself has been preserved, with surviving copies found in the pockets of passengers who made it onto lifeboats. Today, these menus are among the most valuable Titanic artifacts, offering a glimpse into the final moments of luxury before the chaos of the sinking. And that chaos might have played out very differently, had an important safety drill not been cancelled the very same day the Titanic hit the iceberg. Sunday, April 14, 1912, was supposed to include a mandatory lifeboat drill, a routine practice that would have familiarized both passengers and crew with the ship's emergency procedures. But for reasons that remain unclear, the drill was cancelled by Captain Edward Smith. Some historians speculate that he believed the ship's design made such drills unnecessary. Others think he may have wanted to avoid disturbing passengers enjoying their Sunday at sea. This cancellation turned out to be a fatal mistake. When the Titanic struck the iceberg that night, confusion spread quickly. Many passengers had no idea where to go, how lifeboats operated, or even how serious the situation was. The lack of preparedness resulted in lifeboats being launched half-empty, despite there not being enough for everyone on board. Had the drill been conducted as planned, it's possible that more people would have survived. Passengers might have been quicker to act, lifeboats could have been filled to capacity, and the chaotic evacuation could have been more organized. It remains one of the greatest what-ifs in the Titanic story, one small decision that might have changed the course of history. Amid the grandeur of the Titanic, one small but often overlooked crew member had a job just as important as any human on board, a cat named Jenny. Like many ships of the time, the Titanic had an official ship's cat, tasked with keeping the rodent population under control. Jenny was a working cat, likely brought on board from the Harland and Wolff shipyard in Belfast, where she had previously lived aboard the Titanic's sister ship, Olympic. Jenny quickly made herself at home, reportedly living near the kitchens, where the warmth of the ovens made for a cozy resting spot. Some crew members considered her a lucky charm, a common superstition among sailors who believed that having a cat aboard would bring good fortune. Others simply appreciated her presence as she hunted mice and rats that could damage food supplies. What happened to Jenny remains a mystery. Some stories claim she sensed disaster and disembarked in Southampton before Titanic set off on its maiden voyage. Others say she was seen on board up until the very end, curled up in a quiet corner of the ship. No official records confirm her fate, but like so many others aboard, Jenny became part of the Titanic's tragic legend. The sinking of the Titanic was more than just a tragedy. It became a turning point in maritime safety. Before the disaster, many ships were dangerously underprepared for emergencies, operating under outdated regulations that failed to consider the increasing size and capacity of modern ocean liners. The Titanic's loss exposed these flaws in the worst possible way, leading to sweeping changes in maritime law that still shape the rules of sea travel today. One of the most significant changes was the requirement for lifeboats. Before Titanic, ships weren't obligated to carry enough lifeboats for everyone on board. Titanic itself had only 20 lifeboats, enough for about 1,178 people, despite carrying over 2,200 passengers and crew. After the disaster, new laws required that ships have enough lifeboat space for every single person on board. Another major reform was the continuous operation of wireless radios. On the Titanic, the Marconi wireless operators were overwhelmed with personal telegrams from first-class passengers, meaning important safety messages, including iceberg warnings, weren't always prioritized. After the disaster, 24-hour radio watch became mandatory, ensuring that distress signals would never go unheard again. The Titanic also led to the creation of the International Ice Patrol, a monitoring service that still exists today, tracking icebergs in the North Atlantic to prevent future disasters. These regulations, born from tragedy, have saved countless lives. Today, every cruise ship, cargo vessel, and passenger liner follows protocols shaped by the lessons of the Titanic. And while the ship itself may be vanishing, its legacy endures, not just in history books, but in the very laws that keep modern passengers safe at sea. At the bottom of the Atlantic, deep in the darkness where the Titanic rests, something eerie stands out. A pair of shoes lying side by side in the silt, no bones, no body, just shoes untouched for over a century. They belong to someone who never made it to safety. The water and time have erased almost everything else, but these shoes remain, frozen in place like silent witnesses to the disaster. It's unsettling to see them so perfectly arranged. They weren't tossed around by the currents or buried under debris. They sit just as they were when their owner slipped beneath the waves. Some say the shoes mark the exact spot where a victim came to rest before the ocean slowly took everything else. Over the years, more shoes have been spotted in the wreckage. Some are alone, others in pairs, still shaped by the feet that once filled them. Leather preserves well in deep-sea conditions, making these one of the last traces of those lost that night. Unlike the luxurious artifacts displayed in museums, these shoes tell a quieter, more haunting story. There's no gold or fine craftsmanship, just everyday footwear, waiting in the cold dark, long after their owners vanished. Deeper inside the wreck, past the twisted remains of the grand staircase, something unexpected lingers, chandeliers still hanging, swaying gently in the ocean currents. These weren't just light fixtures, they were enormous shimmering centerpieces meant to impress Titanic's wealthiest passengers. Now, covered in deep-sea corrosion, they give off an eerie presence, like ghosts of the ship's lost grandeur. The glass has shattered, the metal arms are coated in rust, but some of these chandeliers still cling to the ceilings, refusing to fall. Divers have captured haunting images of them, frozen in time, dangling over the wreck like eerie reminders of the last elegant night on board. There is no light now, only the flickering glow of submersibles moving through the ruins. But once, these very chandeliers reflected the laughter, music, and conversations of passengers who had no idea their voyage was about to end. Among the wreckage, some of Titanic's greatest treasures have been lost forever. But some things aren't just lost, they're missing, as if they vanished without explanation. That brings us to one of the strangest unsolved mysteries of the wreck site. For decades, explorers have searched the Titanic's remains for one specific artifact, a missing safe, rumored to contain valuables that belong to one of the ship's wealthiest passengers, but it has never been found. Safes have been recovered, some still locked, but this particular one, the subject of countless theories, has simply disappeared. It was said to contain documents, jewels, or even gold. Some believe it was ripped from its place during the sinking into a part of the wreck yet to be explored. Others think it was looted in the early expeditions before strict conservation laws were put in place. There's even speculation that it remains hidden somewhere deep in the ruins, covered in debris, waiting for someone to uncover it. Among the many personal treasures lost on the Titanic, some were never meant to hold value, at least not in the way people think of treasure. Some objects weren't expensive, but they meant everything to the ones who carried them. One of the most heartbreaking finds proves that. A small waterlogged teddy bear was pulled from the wreckage, one of the most fragile artifacts to ever be recovered. It had once belonged to a child, a passenger whose journey ended far too soon. The bear, still intact after decades in the deep, carries an eerie weight. Unlike the lavish jewelry and fine china, this was something personal, something loved. No one knows exactly who owned it. Maybe it was clutched tightly in the arms of a child during the chaos, lost in the confusion as lifeboats filled up. Maybe it was packed away in a suitcase meant to bring comfort in a new home across the ocean. Wherever it was when disaster struck, it now stands as a quiet symbol of the lives that were lost. Not everything on the Titanic was meant to survive. Some items should have been consumed by time and water, but against all odds, they remain. And some of those things hold a strange, almost impossible quality. Like the unopened bottles of champagne, still sitting at the bottom of the ocean, their contents untouched for over a century. Scattered across the wreck site, resting in the cold, dark silence, are bottles of champagne that were never opened. Some still contain their original liquid, perfectly sealed, untouched by time. More than 100 years have passed, yet deep in the Atlantic, these bottles remain as they were on the night of the sinking. They were meant for celebration, perhaps for a toast to a successful voyage, a business deal, or an engagement. Instead, they drifted down into the deep as the Titanic broke apart above them. What makes them even more eerie is that some bottles still hold their fizz. Scientists have speculated that the intense pressure at the bottom of the ocean may have preserved the carbonation, meaning that if someone were to open one today it might still bubble like it did in 1912. These bottles survived where people did not. They stayed intact while the ship around them was reduced to ruins. And yet, no one will ever drink them. They are relics of a moment in time that can never be revisited, souvenirs of a party that ended in disaster. There was another sound that filled Titanic's halls that night, a sound that became legendary. It wasn't a voice or a warning, it was music. A single violin played until the very end now holds one of the most haunting stories tied to the wreck. Wallace Hartley's violin is one of the most famous artifacts ever recovered from the Titanic. It's the instrument he played as the ship sank, leading his band in one last performance meant to calm the panicked crowd. Survivors recalled hearing the music even as lifeboats drifted away, a strange and sorrowful melody floating over the water. Then, silence. For years, people believed the violin was lost forever. After all, it was made of wood, something that should have disintegrated in the ocean. But against all odds, it was found. Preserved in a leather case, it had survived the disaster, buried in time. When it was finally brought to the surface, the discovery shocked the world. It wasn't just an instrument, it was a piece of the final moments of Titanic, something that had been there as the ship slipped into darkness. Some say the violin carries a curse, a tragic energy that lingers after all these years. Others see it as a final fragile link to the souls lost that night. Either way, it remains one of the most haunting objects connected to the Titanic. One that carries not just music, but the echoes of a disaster that still chills the world today. Deep in the wreckage, resting beneath a thick layer of rust and marine life, lies one of the Titanic's most overlooked yet haunting remains, its massive propellers. These weren't just ordinary ship parts. Each blade was over 16 feet wide, designed to drive the Titanic across the Atlantic with unstoppable force. Yet when disaster struck, all that power meant nothing. The engines, the pride of Harland and Wolff's shipbuilders, became useless in the face of an iceberg that ripped through the hull like paper. The propellers remain eerily intact on the seafloor, but signs of the Titanic's violent end are clear. The force of the sinking, the pressure of the deep, and the slow decay of time have twisted and corroded parts of the structure. The once polished bronze now looks ghostly, covered in rusticles, strange organic formations that eat away at the metal like a slow-moving disease. One of the propellers, still connected to the stern section, is half buried in the seabed, while debris from the wreck scatters around it like forgotten remnants of a lost era. It's unsettling to think about what this propeller represents. At full power, it could move the ship at nearly 24 miles per hour, one of the fastest ocean liners of its time. But in the crucial moments before impact, reversing the engines did little to slow the Titanic down. The ship's fate was sealed the moment it struck ice, and all that remains now is a broken piece of engineering lost to the deep. And yet, even heavier than the propellers, even more massive than the engines, lies another piece of Titanic's remains, one that was built to withstand time itself. The Titanic needed something enormous to hold it in place when docked. That's why its anchor chain was forged with links the size of a grown man's torso, designed to carry the weight of the largest anchor ever fitted on a ship at the time, over 15 tons of steel, built to last forever. But today those chains sit broken on the ocean floor, stretching through the wreckage like giant rusted veins of a ghost ship. The sheer scale of the anchor chain is hard to grasp until you see the photos from Titanic's construction. Workers stood beside the links, dwarfed by their size, like ants next to a giant's tools. This chain was designed to withstand almost anything, except the disaster that tore Titanic apart. When the ship split in two, the violent descent to the seafloor dragged parts of the chain with it, twisting the links, snapping sections apart, and leaving others eerily untouched. Despite decades underwater, some parts of the chain remain surprisingly well preserved. The metal, once strong and gleaming, is now covered in deep-sea decay, but the structure is still recognizable. It's a piece of Titanic's skeleton, a reminder of the impossible weight it was built to carry. But unlike the ship itself, which now crumbles in the deep, another part of Titanic was lost completely, something so beautiful, so intricate, that the ocean took it away without a trace. There was a time when sunlight streamed through the Titanic's first-class lounge, casting colorful patterns on the floor, illuminating the luxurious carpets, and dancing across the wood-paneled walls. The lounge wasn't just any room. It was one of the most stunning spaces on the ship, a place where the wealthiest passengers sipped their tea in quiet elegance. Its greatest feature? The massive stained glass windows designed to make travelers feel as though they were in the grand halls of an aristocratic mansion rather than at sea. But unlike the ship's chandeliers, railings, and even furniture, the stained glass windows didn't survive. As the Titanic sank, the force of the water rushing in likely shattered them instantly, sending fragments drifting into the darkness. Unlike metal and porcelain, glass doesn't last long under such extreme conditions. Not a single trace of those breathtaking windows has ever been found in the wreck. They are completely gone, erased from history, their beauty lost forever. It's strange to think that something so fragile was once part of something so powerful. The Titanic was built with the strongest materials of its time, with steel plates and iron rivets meant to endure the worst conditions at sea. And yet what remains of it today is a ghostly ruin, where even the strongest materials are slowly being consumed by time. The stained glass windows may be lost, but their memory lingers in the descriptions, the photographs, and the eerie realization that some parts of the Titanic will never be seen again. Scattered across the seabed, hidden among the wreckage, are small objects that once belonged to the passengers of the Titanic. A pair of glasses, a leather suitcase, a pocket watch stuck at the exact moment the ship went under. These are the things people carried with them, the last remnants of lives that never finished their journey. They tell stories no history book can. Unlike the grand artifacts, the chandeliers, the fine china, the ship's towering structures, these items are deeply personal. They were held, used, and cherished by real people. A pair of gloves found perfectly preserved in the deep-sea silt belonged to someone's father, husband, or son. A postcard, never mailed, still bears the careful handwriting of a passenger who likely never made it to a lifeboat. Some of the most haunting discoveries are letters, words frozen in time, written with no knowledge of the disaster about to unfold. Leather has survived remarkably well in the deep, thanks to the lack of oxygen and light, keeping these items eerily intact. The ocean may have swallowed the Titanic, but it couldn't erase every trace of those who were aboard. Some of these personal items have been recovered and placed in museums, while others remain on the seafloor, untouched for more than a century. But among all the artifacts found, one stands out as particularly strange, an object tied to an ancient mystery, one that some believe carried a curse. Among the Titanic's cargo, hidden away in a wooden crate, was an Egyptian artifact bound for a museum in America. The details surrounding it are murky. Some say it was a mummified priestess, others claim it was a sacred tablet inscribed with ancient texts. But one thing is certain, this object had a reputation long before it ever boarded the Titanic. Stories from the time suggested it was cursed, that anyone who possessed it met with misfortune. And then, it sank with the most infamous disaster in maritime history. While skeptics dismiss the legend, the eerie coincidences surrounding the artifact are hard to ignore. Before the Titanic, it was said to have caused strange accidents, financial ruin, even death for those who tried to move it. Some crew members supposedly refused to handle the crate, fearing the stories of bad luck tied to it. After the sinking, whispers of the mummy's curse spread like wildfire. Some survivors swore they heard passengers talking about it just before the collision. Others believed it had something to do with the ship's terrible fate. Of course, science doesn't support the idea of curses, but the Titanic is filled with enough real-life tragedy that myths don't seem entirely out of place. The mystery deepened when explorers searched the wreck and found no trace of the artifact. Did it break free from its crate and drift into the depths? Was it ever really on board at all? The truth remains unknown, but if strange forces were at play that night, one mistake stood above the rest, a tiny oversight that might have changed everything. It was small, ordinary, just a simple key, but it was missing at the moment it mattered most. This key should have unlocked a locker in the crow's nest, a locker containing the lookout crew's binoculars. Without them, Titanic's lookouts were forced to rely on the naked eye, scanning the dark ocean for any sign of danger. And on the night of April 14, 1912, that danger came in the form of an iceberg, looming in the distance, almost invisible against the Black Sea. The key belonged to Second Officer David Blair, a crew member who was reassigned at the last minute. In his rushed departure, he accidentally took the key with him, unaware of the role it would play in history. When the lookouts realized they had no binoculars, it was too late. By the time they spotted the iceberg, Titanic was moving too fast to turn in time. The ship's fate had already been sealed. After the sinking, the key resurfaced years later, sold at an auction, its true significance finally understood. Could it have saved the Titanic? Some experts believe it wouldn't have made a difference. Others argue that with binoculars the iceberg might have been seen earlier, giving the crew a crucial extra minute to react. In the end, the key became another small but haunting detail in the long list of what-ifs surrounding the Titanic. One of many tiny missteps that added up to one of history's greatest disasters. Amid the rust and decay of the Titanic's wreck, something unexpected has been found. Tiny flashes of light in the darkness. Jewelry still resting on the seafloor, untouched for more than a century. Diamond necklaces, gold bracelets, sapphire rings, luxuries once worn by passengers who had no idea they were on their final voyage. Unlike the ship's chandeliers or furniture, these pieces remain almost unchanged, still shimmering under the lights of deep-sea submersibles. Some of this jewelry has been recovered, placed on display in museums, but much of it is still down there, scattered in the debris, hidden among broken china and crumbling wood. A collection of jewels was found inside a leather pouch, preserved so well that the gems still gleamed as if they had been dropped only yesterday. Among the pieces were brooches, cufflinks, and a striking sapphire and diamond necklace, one that may have belonged to a first-class passenger whose name has long been forgotten. Unlike coins or artifacts marked with White Star Line insignias, jewelry is intensely personal. It belonged to someone specific, someone who once put it on without knowing it would never leave the ocean. These aren't just relics of wealth, they're remnants of lives lost, gifts, heirlooms, or souvenirs from a world that sank in the early hours of April 15, 1912. And jewelry wasn't the only thing recovered that carried an intimate connection to the past. Some items held something far more unusual, something that could still be experienced, even after a century underwater. In the wreckage of the Titanic, inside a leather suitcase buried in the silt, a small collection of perfume vials was found. At first glance they looked like any other relic. Delicate glass containers, their labels faded with time, but when the bottles were carefully opened, something shocking happened. The scent was still there. Over 100 years after the sinking, the perfumes trapped inside these vials still carried their original fragrance. The suitcase belonged to Adolf Saalfeld, a first-class passenger and a professional perfumer. He was on his way to America, carrying dozens of scent samples meant to launch a new business. He never got the chance. His case, along with his perfumes, went down with the ship. But the deep-sea conditions preserved them in an almost unnatural way. When researchers uncorked one of the bottles, they described being overwhelmed by a powerful floral aroma, like stepping into a garden from another era. These perfumes weren't just remnants of luxury. They were a physical, almost ghostly connection to the Titanic's passengers. The scent they left behind was the same one they smelled as they walked the grand hallways or dined in the first-class saloon. Unlike most artifacts, which only allow people to see the past, these bottles allowed people to experience it in a completely different way. It's a rare reminder that some things, even delicate things, can outlast disaster, waiting in the dark for someone to find them again. Among the many relics recovered from the Titanic, one stands out as particularly haunting. A compass, still intact, its needle frozen in place. This instrument once guided the largest and most luxurious ship in the world, pointing the way toward a future that would never come. Now it sits silent, its journey long over. The compass was part of Titanic's navigation system, meant to help the crew chart their course across the Atlantic. It had been set toward New York, but after the collision, direction no longer mattered. As the ship's bow dipped beneath the waves, the world's greatest ocean liner had only one course left, straight down. The very device designed to lead the Titanic safely through the ocean now rests in the deep, with no destination, no purpose, no path forward. Unlike other artifacts, this one is different. It wasn't personal like a piece of jewelry, nor was it decorative like a chandelier. It was functional, built for one thing, to guide. And yet, even the most precise instruments on board couldn't change the events of that night. The Titanic's compass now lies still, a reminder that no amount of planning, no level of technology could have prevented the disaster once it was already set in motion. Scattered in the wreckage, lying half buried in the sand are pieces of silverware. Forks, knives, and spoons still arranged in neat rows where the ship's cupboards once stood. They were meant for Titanic's passengers, some for extravagant multi-course meals in first class, others for simple dinners in third class. But the people who were supposed to use them never got the chance. These are everyday objects, yet their presence on the ocean floor makes them unsettling. Plates have been found stacked together, ready to be set on a table that no one would ever sit at. In the debris field, cutlery is sometimes found resting beside personal belongings. A fork next to a purse, a knife near a lost pair of boots. It's as if the meal had been interrupted mid-course, the people swept away, but the objects left behind. Unlike furniture or grand decorations, silverware tells a quieter, more human story. The passengers may have had different social standings, but they all gathered for meals, shared conversations, and planned for what they thought was another day at sea. Those small metal utensils, now rusted and worn, are all that remain of moments that were supposed to be ordinary. The Titanic was filled with music. Pianos were placed throughout the ship, from grand saloons to third-class common areas, meant to entertain passengers on their long journey. But of all the instruments aboard, the most spectacular was the grand piano in the first-class reception room. Polished, elegant, and massive, it was the heart of the ship's social gatherings. And like everything else, it went down with the Titanic. Now, no trace of it remains. While chandeliers still hang and dinnerware still rests in the wreckage, the grand piano has vanished. Wood doesn't last in deep-sea conditions, and any remains of the instrument were likely consumed by the ocean long ago. But some survivors swore they could still hear it playing even after the ship began to sink. In the chaos, as passengers rushed to the decks, as lifeboats were lowered, someone was still at the piano, filling the air with music one last time. It's eerie to think about what remains and what was erased completely. Some objects have survived untouched, while others, like the Titanic's most beautiful piano, exist now only in memory. That's about it. Write in the comments which find from the Titanic scared you the most. For more useful information, watch other videos.